The following account is real. Names have been changed to protect the living and the innocent. This journal contains language and content that may not be suitable for all listeners.
I want this episode to speak for itself as an epilogue to the first collection of my funeral home stories, but I also understand that it would be reckless of me not to have a disclaimer on this episode. In an era when everyone gets to speak their truths, which we all annoyingly tolerate, allow me 45 minutes to talk to you like I would a good friend or family member. Having said that, since a lot of this episode is about suicide, it would be irresponsible for me not to tell you that if you or anyone you know is thinking about suicide or in some mental distress, remember, it's not embarrassing to reach out for help. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline number is 1-800-273-8255. Okay, consider yourself disclaimed. Here we go.
The following account is real. Names have been changed to protect the living and the innocent. This journal contains language and content that may not be suitable for all listeners.
My name is Grant, and these are my funeral home stories. Epilogue. Or is it a prologue? Section 1. The Afterlife Discussion. Just because I work at a funeral home doesn't mean I have some secret or key to understanding the afterlife. I'm just as clueless as you are, and truthfully, I don't think much about where we go when we die. It's unimportant to me. Knowing or not knowing what happens won't change the happening. I'm tired of intelligent people having dumb conversations with me about something no one knows anything about. Every day, people I meet at the funeral home want to talk about heaven. I feign interest and yes and whatever thought they're having, but why are folks so focused on heaven? It's a comfort thing, right? When you or a loved one dies, you want to imagine appearing in a perfect utopia that you've earned from living a virtuous and moral life, although I'm not always entirely sure what that means in practice. Morality seems to be flexible and changes depending on which group of friends you're palling around with in any given circumstance. A la the Branch Davidians or cat owners. I get the appeal of heaven. Seems cool. Gives a lot of people motivation to do good and probably motivates a lot of people not to be evil. And I can tell you firsthand from my experience at the funeral home, it's a lot easier to cope with something like Grandma and Grandpa's death if you imagine them in heaven rather than disappearing into absolute nothingness. Even though I'm conflicted on this heaven or hell stuff, nullity doesn't seem like a fitting way for people like my grandparents to spend eternity, who, by all accounts, were beaming pillars of morality in their community. They went to church every Sunday, volunteered where they could, and even started some weird Christian book and bridge club with other like-minded old people, which I have again been reassured wasn't a cover story for weekly swinger meetups. In all seriousness, my grandparents were good, sweet, pleasant, moral people. It's crazy they died in a shootout with the police after their meth lab exploded. I'm kidding. They died about 3 months apart peacefully in their beds in an assisted living facility, knowing full well their lives and how they chose to live earned them a ticket to meet their maker in paradise. On paper, that all works out. Be a good person, go to heaven. For their sake, I hope they're right. Everyone needs a way to cope with death. We all do things to distract ourselves from harsh realities. I know I have and still do. And I'm certainly not in a position to judge anyone for what they believe or how they choose to cope with mortality. But what about hell? I've never heard bereaved family and friends at a visitation speculating what layer of hell Uncle Randy is spinning around in. So who goes there and what does one actually have to do to get in? Aside from the obvious, of course. I get the broad strokes, but the finer points elude me. In fact, there's one question in particular that I'm circling back to more than I expected as a young man, for both professional and selfish reasons. What if you're mostly a good person and just do one thing that wasn't morally permissible? Like what, you ask? Section 2. Suicide. In Catholic school, I was told that suicide, regardless of the circumstance, leads to an eternity of damnation for the committer because human life is sacred and should be protected and cherished. I don't disagree with that statement entirely. Sure, life is sacred and yes, it probably should be protected, but the harsh permanence of hell and damnation seem a bit excessive as a blanket judgment for all suicides. I mean, you're gonna tell me the guy that Ned and I picked up last year with stage 4 cancer who killed himself by slitting his wrist to relieve his pain and take the stress and financial burden off his family is going to the same place Adolf Hitler is spending eternity? I would say no, but my high school's theology department would disagree. Now, I understood the need to make religion required coursework at a Catholic high school, but I never really meshed with the faculty or the curriculum. In fact, you'll be happy to know I was thrown out of Mrs. Allen's morality class many times for asking purposely difficult questions. I was a bit of a handful when I was awake. So much so that the vice principal actually told me I was no longer allowed to ask questions about suicide, masturbation, polygamy, the crucifixion, or cults in religion class. Otherwise, I would have an in-school suspension, or worse, depending on the question, I guess. For the record, I don't have any issues with religion or faith. I think it incentivizes people to live better lives and also gives a lot of folks comfort and hope in times when they need it most, like when someone gets sick or dies. I haven't been called to any particular religion at this stage of my life. Catholic middle and high school as a baptized, non-practicing Methodist was like whiplash and wore me out on the whole concept of church. Also, when 2 of my childhood friends killed themselves and the spiritual institution I looked to for comfort, hope, and guidance told me my friends were burning in hell, it's easy and I think completely understandable to want to find comfort and hope in other places. So, I did. Rest assured, though, I have faith in something. It's hard to tell what that something is, but, I'm not sure how to conclude this thought in a way that's not totally pretentious. So let's talk about my friends. Jeff and Tommy, 15 and 17. Jeff killed himself when I was in grade school, Tommy when I was in high school. Both chose to end their lives with handguns in their houses after arguments with their parents. I can't imagine any argument with my parents where the only logical conclusion is killing myself. Nothing seems that important or severe. I'm not sure if Tommy and Jeff had planned on killing themselves before the arguments with their parents, or if something in the argument led them to a split second of insanity. Whichever the case may be, their parents never recovered. How could they? They'll always carry the burden of being the catalyst to their child's death, even though there were most likely much larger contributing factors. No one in our friend group is entirely sure what either of the arguments were about, but we have our theories. So why am I thinking about Tommy and Jeff? Well, Tommy and Jeff were both good, sweet, pleasant, moral people, just like my grandparents. But Tommy and Jeff chose to end their own lives, which, according to both of their religions, is one of those pesky mortal sins. So that leads me back to the question. A mostly good person has one major self-inflicted slip in morality. Then what? Heaven or hell? Mrs. Allen, the most overbearing of my religion teachers, told me that both of my friends had made an eternity-ruining choice. She actually said that to me. Eternity-ruining. Mrs. Allen actually thinks my 15 and 17-year-old friends are burning in hell right now. And they very well could be. Listen, I get it, Mrs. Allen. You teach religion at an embarrassment of a private high school, and if that's what you believe, great. But maybe keep that to yourself when you're talking to one of your students about their dead friends. I'm 22 now, and I'm clearly still a little salty about this. Forgive me. I don't know where Tommy and Jeff went. Well, I can tell you quite literally where they went. They're buried pretty close to each other. A couple 100 feet apart, actually. I worked one of their services and went to the other. Tommy's family didn't use our funeral home. They chose to go with a cheaper, much tackier option in funeral homes. One of our competitors, the one whose chapel shares an adjoining wall with a Dunkin' Donuts. Classy. Jeff had an open casket because he used a small caliber revolver, so his head looked swollen and a little bruised, but still recognizable and appropriate for public visitation. Tommy's casket, on the other hand, closed. A funeral director from the parlor that picked him up told my dad it was a very gruesome scene. Brains and blood covering his track trophies and family pictures next to his bed. A huge mess. And that sounds like Tommy. Or does it? Truth be told, their deaths feel like they happened so long ago. I don't really remember much about Tommy or Jeff at this point, aside from the fact that one had a black belt and the other played saxophone. It's weird how you tell yourself that you'll never forget something, and then one day you wake up and realize other things have written over the files in your never forget folder. Other shit just became more important than remembering my dead friends, I suppose. Or maybe I never really cared that much to remember in the first place. Either way, I don't have any insights or conclusions about heaven or hell or if suicide is some unforgivable sin. But I can tell you, sin or not, suicides are usually a giant mess. And not always for the obvious reasons. They're just so complicated, but rarely explained in any meaningful or truthful way, leaving friends and family hurt and muddled. Theories explaining suicide are mostly hyperbole about the deceased state of well-being and gossip from acquaintances lurking around visitations drinking free coffee. Correction, spilling free coffee. In most of my dealings with suicide at the funeral home, families stay pretty tight-lipped about, well, the details. Rarely will you see the word suicide printed as cause of death in a person's obit in the papers. Families and funeral directors almost always choose to use a phrase like died suddenly when referring to suicide, but this sidestepping only causes more speculation and questions among friends and nosy people trying to glean insight from obituaries. It's a dignity thing. The way a person dies is actually a much more private matter than most people consider. Whether you die in a horrific car accident, of cancer, or from something self-inflicted, it's genuinely no one's business but the family's. So, unless somebody's a real inconsiderate blabbermouth, private information stays private. If you haven't been able to tell by now, the unknown is unavoidably interesting to me. My ears always perk up when I hear suicide, whether that's at the funeral home or in my regular civilian life. Why is that? It's simple. Well, technically I suppose it's complicated, but I can trace it back to empathy. Well, maybe not empathy. Things have gotten dark for me in the past, but never that dark. Not yet, at least. So it's confounding for me to imagine a circumstance pushing me over the edge. A person's reasoning for suicide evaporates the moment they end their life, unless they leave a note, which we unfortunately never see. It's long gone before we show up. I'm not sure if the cops take it or the family hangs on to it. It's been 10 years of suicides and I'm yet to see an authentic note. Part of me is okay with that. The other part, the inquisitive part, not so much. Most of the suicide calls I've been on have had little or no explanation for their happening, which is why I spend more time than I should thinking about suicide. Let me clarify, because I've learned from past mistakes that telling people you're interested in thinking about suicide with no greater context can cause undue concern among family and friends. So I should say, I'm interested in most facets of suicide, but not compelled to plan or commit my own. I think it's a natural and justified curiosity given how I grew up and what I do for a living now. Truth be told, I'm surprised that I've seen as much suicide as I have in my small, mostly conservative, God-fearing town over the last decade working for my father. Suicide's more of a thing in real life than I imagined it would be when the concept was explained to me as a child. People here must not be very happy. Thinking back, there have been so many. The woman with the drain cleaner, the landscaper with the extension cord, the foot doctor, the factory worker who almost decapitated himself with a box cutter, and the guy in the basement hot tub. I feel like that was more of an accident than a suicide, though. So why is something so fucked up so interesting to me? Maybe it's because of Jeff and Tommy and my exposure to suicide at such a young age. Or maybe it's because I'm conditioned to be fascinated by more extreme things from having this job for so long. Or perhaps it's just interesting to me for no reason other than the fact that it just is. I'm not fucked up. If you had my job, you'd feel the same way about suicide calls as I do. They're sad, yes, but they pay the same as nursing home calls and are infinitely more interesting. It's the how and the why, the whole heaven and hell thing. It's who they want to find them and how big of a mess they make. It's even the way they choose to decorate or not decorate. All of it. I wish I was just one of those guys who liked watching sports. Section 3. The Call. Tuesday, 1:13 a.m. My phone rings. I wasn't really asleep, just laying in bed thinking about how lame it would be if my phone did ring. Or I was asleep and dreaming about how lame it would be. Either way, it's a typical Tuesday night on call. Hours of tossing and turning. Sometimes the phone rings, sometimes it doesn't. Tonight, it's ringing. Lucky me. It's probably another nursing home call. We've got 2 pending. Pending in funeral speak means that a family has alerted us that the death of their loved one is imminent. That can mean hours, weeks, or months. Sometimes much longer. We've gotten a call from Patrick Johnson just about every other Friday afternoon for the past 8 months, letting us know his mother is going to go at any minute, so we should be ready. And we always tell him we are. He's one of those high-maintenance types. Must be inheriting a lot of money. Fucking curly-haired weirdo already has his mother's eulogy written. I don't want to deal with him, and I know Ned and my dad feel the same way, so for all of our sakes, I hope it's not Mrs. Johnson. It would be an easy call, though. She's at a top-notch nursing home that makes picking up dead people a breeze. The only downside is it's always so fucking hot in there. Most nursing homes are, though. Old folks just run cooler. Probably their old circulatory system shutting down on their way out. The phone stopped ringing. Shit. I sit up quickly and grab my silver Motorola Razr off my nightstand and flip it open. 1 missed call. Ned. I call back. He answers. Grant, it's Ned. Confused, I say, Ned, I know it's you. I'm calling you back. Okay, Grant. We got a police call. Flummoxed by Ned's weird phone etiquette, I listen. Phil Malinsky on Wallace Street. Cops are finishing up now. Carter opens his eyes but doesn't get up when I turn on the lamp on my nightstand. He's getting old. Or maybe he's getting sick. We make eye contact and his tail gently taps the wall. I smile and feel relieved knowing that I'm not going to another nursing home this evening, but I'm a little bummed it's a police call and is probably going to be a pain in the ass in some capacity. Groggily, I ask Ned, anything interesting? Without hesitation, Ned says no, followed by 2 of the most interesting words I've heard in weeks. Shotgun suicide. Ned's unimpressed, but my nerves bubble up a bit through my gut. A shotgun is such an aggressive approach. I'm imagining the condition of Phil Malinsky's head. I hope this doesn't take all night. I'd like to sleep a little bit this week. We hang up and I pop out of bed, surprisingly energized, yet reluctant. Will I see something challenging tonight that will change me to the core? Will I finally see a suicide note in person? Probably not to either one of those questions, but you never know. It's funny, I've been at the funeral home for so long and have made hundreds of removals, seeing and picking up every kind of dead body, that for the most part I'm desensitized and conditioned for anything. But the words police call still make me a little nervous. Nervous is too strong of a word. Uneasy. Yeah, that's probably the way I'd describe it. Section 4. Bad Tuesday. The day that made me uneasy. Listener note. This is what I'm willing to share about Chapter 12. You know that line from Forrest Gump about the box of chocolates? Well, it applies to police calls too. You never know what you're going to get, so you're never really sure what you're stepping into, figuratively and literally. It could be a little old Irma who fell down her steps, or the most mentally fatiguing shit that sticks and eats away at your brain. Some calls hit you like a truck. Truthfully and without exaggeration, the most horrible things I've seen in my life I've seen on police calls. It's such a bizarre feeling, experiencing trauma from seeing someone else's trauma. You know, there must have been generations worth of fucked up funeral directors before therapy came into fashion. Who am I kidding? None of the funeral directors I know are really the therapy types. Could you imagine Ned having a heart-to-heart about how death calls make him feel? No, I couldn't. Funeral directing is a profession lost in time in that regard. Lindsay was always sweet about checking in on me after seeing something awful, though. Like when we picked up that guy that stabbed his family before burning to death in his basement. The blood, the soot, the smile. When she used to ask me how I was doing, I'd always say fine, even when I was freaked out the most. Speaking of, I still haven't fully gotten over what I saw when I was 16 with Lindsay on a beautiful June Tuesday morning. An entire family wiped out on the tollway after a semi rear-ended their stopped SUV. The estimated speed of impact was 75 or 80 miles per hour. The father and son were killed instantly by the impact, basically crushing them inside the vehicle. But the daughter, who was about 4 years old and in the back seat, was thrown from the vehicle and run over by an 18-wheeler swerving to avoid the initial wreckage. blowing her little body into pieces and smushing her bones into the pavement underneath hot, heavy, speeding rubber. Just scattered raw chunks of meat with skin, teeth, and blood-stained hair. Hair the same color as Lindsay's without the blood, if I'm recalling correctly. It was about 70 degrees and breezy that morning, and they were steamrolling blacktop near the crash site. I love that smell. The road workers just kept working. They seemed unfazed or unaware of the carnage, which is hard to believe considering how much this call deeply affected me. And I don't think I was the only one. The rescue workers were more solemn than usual. There wasn't any chattering about sports, cars, and joyless marriages to be overheard. At 16, I had been on enough police calls to know that that was uncommon. Their reverence at the crash site made me realize whatever I was seeing that morning wouldn't be soon forgotten. And I was right. It was a doozy. Some calls are just too much for your brain to process all at once, so you file it away to process at a later time. But instead of being filed in your never forget folder, mentioned earlier, those memories get put in a hidden folder somewhere deep on your hard drive. And then one day, when you're not expecting it, you're clicking through some old memories and bang, how you felt in that moment floods back and you remember everything. If I recall correctly from my pretentious year as a psychology student, that's called repression. Ironically, repression is pretty much the only term I remember from those classes. For whatever reason, my brain is protecting me from something because what I remember from that tollway accident is alarming. But the fact that I don't remember much else is more alarming. How is it possible that I can remember that my girlfriend when I was in 7th grade played the flute, but I can't remember what kind of SUV was driven in the worst highway crash I had ever seen? I feel like it was an Oldsmobile. I always make notes of brand names I see on death calls. It's my morbid version of I Spy, I guess. It's a way to cope with the heavy shit. Accidents, suicides, child death. You know, it's a way to take you out of the awfulness of the moment so you can be professional. No one taught me or told me to do this. I think it's just an automatic coping mechanism, like talking too much when I'm nervous. Lindsay checked in with me several times in the 30 or so minutes we were on the tollway dumping pieces of that nice family into disaster pouches. I do remember the remnants of the little girl's yellow t-shirt smashed with flesh and gravel. It was too much. All 3 of those bodies were in sickening shape, but the daughter's body made me feel things I had never felt before. I still think about how hard that little girl's body must have hit the pavement and how hard that semi-tire hit her little face. The crash was over in seconds, but I can only imagine it in slow motion. That police call fucked me up something fierce in the moment. Up until that point, I hadn't seen the full destruction of a human like that. It was also the first time I had seen a child mauled by a machine. I simply had never imagined a scenario where something so horrible was possible with virtually no explanation. Perhaps my brain would have found it easier to process if someone were clearly in the wrong, but it's unclear who or what was at fault. That day, those cars and the chunks of kid and smashed family changed the way I saw my own mortality. I was 16, newly licensed to drive, and fully aware that at any moment, for any number of reasons, I could be eliminated from existence in some surprising and utterly nightmarish fashion. You're just driving home from a fun vacation and wham, no more family and no open casket. Did I mention they had a golden retriever in the car? Yeah, made my heart hurt imagining Carter exploded to bits on fresh blacktop. Anyway, I didn't tell anyone that call bothered me back at the office. Why would I? That was my first big highway accident, and I didn't want Lindsay and the other directors to think I was too sensitive to go on the heavy calls. Then I'd be forced to pull weeds and do baby shit at the funeral home while the real adults went out and did the serious work. Fuck that. I'm not doing this to collect a paycheck from daddy like most other owners' kids. I want to get my hands dirty, not be benched for having too many feelings. I mean, I am the owner's kid. I should be made for this, right? Don't get me wrong. As uncomfortable as that morning was, I still thought it was kind of a neat thing to have experienced. I know neat isn't really the appropriate word for something so awful, but my vocabulary isn't developed enough to describe how the mixture of adrenaline, horror, and intrigue felt that day. All my friends were mowing lawns and lifeguarding that summer. Not me. I was experiencing the worst life had to offer. Looking back, I was eager, but not ready. If it's not obvious, that Tuesday was a bad one. It's one of those days I'm not sure I'm happy to have in my memory bank, but it's always going to be there regardless of how hard I try to forget. You know what? It was an Oldsmobile. Why am I thinking about this again, right now? Because that call started just like the one I'm about to go on and many before it. Hey Grant, we got a police call. So with that in mind, you can imagine the mixed bag of thoughts and feelings I have whenever I hear the words police call over the phone in the middle of the night. The problem is you don't know which calls are the heavy ones until you're standing in the middle of it. Tonight's call, Phil Malinsky, a shotgun suicide. Sounds messy and depressing. Should I be ready to confront my own mortality again, or have a sleepless night pondering suicide and its implications on the afterlife? Should I be nervous? Excuse me. Should I be uneasy? Section 5. A shotgun, some guy, and a grandfather clock. Ned and I are on our way to pick up Phil Malinsky now. I'm in a good mood and truthfully not the least bit anxious. Not much uneasiness this evening. I'm actually fairly peppy. At the moment, I'm only slightly annoyed that I accidentally put on a cordovan belt with my black suit and black shoes. Total square move on my part, but it's fine. No one should notice. It's 2 a.m. and we're headed to a shotgun suicide. My mismatched belt and shoes should be the last thing anyone's paying attention to at this evening's festivities. If there's one thing I've learned from having this gig as long as I have, it's never bring nice things to death calls. Sunglasses, unsecured cell phones, expensive Ralph Lauren ties, leather-soled shoes, so on. The reason I say this is because chances are you're going to get blood, shit, or some other human fluid on it, and then it's basically ruined. So when you get tipped off that you've got a possible head-exploding situation, you dress for the occasion in your shittiest Kohl's brand double-breasted black suit that barely fits, and you leave any item of importance in the car. There's not much traffic tonight. The radio's on faintly. I crack my window. The cool air rushes in, and it's a bit chillier than I thought. I roll it back up. I wonder how many more nights like this I have in me. I don't want to do this forever. The lack of sleep is killing me, and the booze probably isn't helping much either. Ned and I aren't really talking tonight. We're not mad at each other or anything. We've just had every conceivable conversation possible over the last few years, and he knows I'd rather not talk than to pretend to give a shit about the Cubs or Bears. Sports are Ned's thing. Music and horror films are mine. We don't pretend to share interests anymore. Some nights we just drive quietly, and that's okay with me. I'm just happy he finally stopped asking me about Mary. Ned let me bum a dip tonight. He chews Grizzlies, so I can literally feel the shards of fiberglass shredding my lower lip when I spit into my styrofoam cup. But the buzz makes it totally worth it. Ned turns down Wallace Street, and I throw my dip out my window and check my teeth in the visor mirror. We're not really in a shitty part of town, but I wouldn't classify it as nice either. We pull up to a brick bungalow-style house with a white and black Crown Victoria city police cruiser parked in front by the mailbox with all its lights off but still running. I always wonder how much of the city's money is spent on gas for idling vehicles. 14252. This is us, Ned says, pulling into the driveway behind a 1995 white Ford Taurus with a sunroof package and a CD hanging from its rearview mirror. This must be Phil's car? It's a junky, rusted-out piece of shit. The bumper is held on with bungee cords and duct tape, and there's a large crack in the back windshield. It's the type of car you'd buy for $400 from a guy off the side of a county road when you're trying to be thrifty or find yourself in financial trouble. Judging by the part of town we're in and the fact that this car's probable owner just killed himself, I'll venture a guess to say that this car was not purchased out of pure frugalness, but more out of necessity. Ned and I get out of the van and unload the stretcher from the back. We hear a screen door slam near the front of the house and turn to see who it is. It's the city cop that belongs to the idling cruiser. I've seen this guy in calls before, but I've never learned his name. That's basically the relationship we have with most crime scene cops. Everyone's a little too busy doing their jobs for proper, formal introductions. Hey guys, thanks for getting here so quick, the officer says, standing on a very small elevated stoop connected to the house. Got a real mess in here. We walk toward the officer on a cement sidewalk that runs from the driveway to the front door, lift the cot, and walk up a petite chipping brick step before entering the house. The light aluminum screen door slams behind me. Ned, the officer, and I are standing in the foyer now, and from what I can tell, this house is a fucking disgusting dump, which is made ever more apparent by the fact that every light in the house is turned on. Did the police do that, or did Phil want all his lights on when he killed himself? Probably the cops. It's hard for me to imagine anyone killing themselves in a well-lit room. You know, I've always been curious what rentals in this part of town look like, and it's neither surprising nor disappointing. It's exactly how I imagine them. Everything in here is covered in dust and reeks like stale cigarette smoke. There are no pictures on the wall, end tables, plants, rugs, or lamps. Just plain off-white carpet, cheap plastic blinds, and wood and wicker ceiling fans. Nothing in this house indicates the person living here cares that they live here. Well, there is one thing. Just to my left stands a proud and polished cherry-stained grandfather clock. It looks like it was made out of maple or some other fancy wood with a brass clock face, pendulum, and weights. I know this because we have 3 of these at the funeral home, and I may or may not have broken 1 or 2 of them and had to pay for the repairs. This clock is gorgeous, and the pendulum is still swinging. The weights driving the clock are almost near the top. Phil must have wound this in the last 24 hours. Seems like a strange priority for someone who's planning to commit suicide, right? Perhaps Phil wasn't planning on committing suicide. I think about Tommy and Jeff and their instances of insanity. What chores did they do on the days they took their own lives? Did they know it would be their last time doing those chores? Now that I'm aware of the clock, I hear its mechanisms moving inside. It's a relatively soothing sound considering where we are and what we're about to do. The clock's face reads 2:20. Ned reaches into his coat pocket and grabs 2 pair of heavy-duty blue surgical gloves and tosses me a set over the stretcher. The officer fills us in on the details he has while we put on our gloves, although I'm only half listening because my gloves aren't being very cooperative. My left hand is a little clammy, so the glove isn't sliding on. It's getting stuck around the base of my fingers. I blow into the bottom of the glove, filling it with air for a moment so it can slide down around my fingers in place. Ned pulls out his notepad to jot down the pertinent details from the officer that we'll need later. Name: Phil Malinsky. Age: 38. Next of kin: Catherine and Nathan Malinsky. His parents. Parents? This guy's 38 and his emergency contact are his mom and dad? Do you think they're going to be surprised when they learn of their son's death? Or do you suppose they've been anticipating a call like this for a while? I'm jarred back to listening actively when I hear the officer say the word autopsy. Isn't this a shotgun suicide? Why do they need an autopsy? What are they going to find? The real cause of Phil's death was high blood pressure? Come on. Autopsies are so invasive, not to mention expensive. How much money is wasted every year performing autopsies on self-inflicted gunshot suicide cases? I look down at the base of the clock. I notice a pair of Columbia work boots caked with mud placed on a piece of newspaper sitting next to the noble timepiece. Peculiar. Who can afford a grandfather clock like this, but not a mat to keep their muddy boots from ruining the carpet? Phil's clock was either a gift or some prized family heirloom he inherited. Or, I don't know, maybe he stole it. There's just no way a 38-year-old man driving a 13-year-old Ford Taurus with that muddy of work boots is going out of his way to spend his hard-earned money on a clock. But I've been wrong before. Ned flips his notebook shut and slips it into his jacket pocket. Following the officer further into the house with the stretcher, on our left we pass a doorless frame to an undecorated kitchen with a card table and 2 folding chairs under a cheap light fixture hanging from the ceiling. On our right is a living/sitting area with an ugly burgundy couch near a coffee table with 3 ashtrays filled with cigarette butts surrounded by soda cans. Across from the ugly couch sits a TV-DVD combo unit placed on a TV dinner tray in a way that suggests apathy, but also single. He's in this bedroom, the officer says, pointing to a door at the end of the hallway. Ned cranes his neck around, stops walking, and says, "We're not going to be able to make the corner with the cot, so we'll bag him up in the bedroom and load him out here in the hallway." We drop the stretcher to its lowest setting, unzip the top cover, and pull out a disaster pouch. Ned flips it over his shoulder as he and the officer walk into Phil's bedroom. I follow behind. Now standing in Phil's bedroom, I'm greeted by a blast of red in stark contrast to the bare white walls and cheap mismatched bedroom furniture. The officer was right. We do have a mess here. Big time. Whoever owns this house is going to shit their pants when they see this. Hopefully they'll be able to get the crime scene cleaners here before everything can really settle in. I'd probably just tear the whole place down. It's not that nice of a house. Phil's laying on his back in the center of a neatly made double bed in a pool of his own blood, which has soaked into the blue and white plaid comforter and accent pillow set. It's actually a pretty nice comforter. Well, was. And hey, kudos to Phil for making his bed before he killed himself on it. Again, like Phil winding his grandfather clock, making the bed is a weird chore for someone to do who's planning on killing themselves. I look around the room for anything resembling a suicide note. Nothing. The red blood covering the white and blue plaid comforter feels patriotic in the most morbid sense. Phil's arms are by his side but slightly bent at the elbow, with his hands and fingers contorted in a very unnatural, tense fashion. Pistol grip, I think to myself. Correction, shotgun grip. Phil's bare feet hang off the edge of the bed, not quite touching the floor. Oh, did I mention half of his head was missing? Well, probably not half. Maybe like a third. I'm not the medical examiner performing the autopsy or anything, but I would be willing to say Phil's cause of death is that he put a gun in his mouth and fired up. What's left of the top of his head are rough, bloody, wet skin flaps hanging limply over the giant hole in the top of his skull. The rough shape of the flaps reminds me of an exploded semi-tire you'd see on the side of the highway, but more organic and mushy. I think about that little girl on the tollway. Immediately and quite naturally, I make a comparison from what I remember on the tollway to what I'm looking at right now. The little girl was much worse. Both of Phil's eyes are open and almost appear untouched by the destruction just a few inches north. The look on his face isn't relief, though. It's more of a glazed-over absence, like he's just about to fall asleep but noticed something at the tip of his nose. I wonder if it hurt. The look on his face doesn't suggest pain or terror, but nothing about his appearance suggests comfort and restfulness. I notice roughly half of Phil's brain between his body and the pillows at the head of his bed. The other half is probably smashed against the plain white wall or ceiling directly behind his body like it was shot out of a lawnmower. I'm not really a gun guy, so I'm not sure if he used a slug or a buckshot. I do really like Phil's comforter, though. I wonder where he got it. Then the officers start talking about sports while we all hover over the body, figuring out the best way to move Phil without ruining our clothes. I find myself transfixed on Phil's head flaps sunk in on themselves, with medium-length blood-soaked hair stuck in clumps to Phil's skin like noodles covered in marinara sauce stuck to your plate at the end of a meal. Sorry, that was gross. I'm starving, and Italian sounds delicious right now. Needless to say, there's a colossal mess in this shoebox diorama of a bedroom. In the moments leading up to Phil's death, do you suppose he thought about the mess, or the team of people paid to clean up that mess, or his security deposit? He probably wasn't thinking clearly at all about anything, just death and whatever he hoped was next. This is clear to me by his method. The reason Phil chose something as destructive as a shotgun is to make sure the job is done right, and it was. I get sad for a moment imagining Phil all alone and sad wandering around his house, smoking cigarettes and winding his clock. He must have had a job. Was there no one there for him to talk to? Maybe Phil wasn't a talk about your feelings type guy. Phil's wearing bootcut blue jeans and a plain gray, heavily blood-stained crewneck t-shirt with a large green and yellow ND for Notre Dame across his chest. I wonder if he was a fan or an alum. Along with Phil's body in bed, there's a desk and end tables that are made out of cheap black particle board. There's a silver wire hamper overflowing with clothes sitting in the corner of the room closest to the door we came in. Just above his mound of soiled laundry is a plain and nondescript wooden cross tacked to the wall. There's nothing else on the walls in this house. And for that reason, the cross stands out as much as the grandfather clock in the foyer, but for sadder and potentially eternity-ruining reasons. Was Phil religious? You don't hang a cross up in your bedroom unless you're pretty serious about religion. How do you suppose Phil dealt with the religious dissonance of committing suicide? Was the gamble of spending eternity in hell worth it to relieve whatever feelings or mental illness led him to this? For his sake, I hope so. But maybe Phil didn't even believe in hell. I'm not sure I do, so why should I assume he did? When it was time to move Phil's body into the disaster pouch, I drifted down towards his feet, letting Ned know without words that I wanted him to take the head. I'm not really in the mood for all that tonight. Not because I'm grossed out or anything, mostly because I just don't want to work all that hard. Moving Phil was simple, just your standard drag and drop. Well, less drop, more gently sat down. In the process of moving Phil's body off the bed, a green Jolly Rancher candy fell out of Ned's coat pocket and ended up landing in the pool of coagulated blood on the bed. The officer and I both laughed when I dared Ned to eat it. Unfazed by it, Ned just shook his head and said, "I don't think so, Grant." We ended up using a second disaster pouch after we covered the first one in enough blood to merit doing so. There was a lot of blood. So much so that when we moved Phil's body, it literally sounded like we emptied a small pitcher of water onto carpet and plastic. The grandfather clock sounds in the front room, playing a familiar tune I've heard 1,000 times. It's 2:30 now. We secure Phil's body onto the cot, leave the house, and load the stretcher into the van without incident. It's refreshing to feel the cool, non-cigarette scented air enter my lungs. I feel calm. I didn't experience anything life-changing tonight. This call was neither surprising nor disappointing. It was exactly how I imagined it. Ned and I get in the van. He starts the engine, and before he puts it in gear to back out of the driveway, leaving this house and Phil's crummy Ford Taurus behind, Ned tosses his can of wintergreen Grizzly in my lap and asks, "What was the deal with that grandfather clock?" I'm tickled that Ned noticed this too. On the way to drop Phil's body at the hospital, Ned and I have our first new conversation in weeks about the make, origin, and looming presence of the grandfather clock in Phil's house. Neither one of us know for sure how or why Phil acquired the clock, but we have our theories. Section 6. Where do we go? Wednesday, 12:17 p.m. It's lunchtime. Everyone's gone. It's been a long morning. Just as I was getting settled back into bed and drifting off to sleep after the Malinsky call, my phone rang again. It was Ned. We had another house call. Nothing to write home about. Massive heart attack in a nicer part of town. It was first floor with easy access. Nothing challenging, just time-consuming. It was 5:30 by the time we wrapped that call, so instead of going home, I decided to grab breakfast at Denny's. I had biscuits and gravy, followed by 2 Diet Rockstar energy drinks before reporting back to the office for my morning chores. After a bout of explosive diarrhea, I helped Ned with Mrs. Linderman's makeup, mostly hands and lips. Ned can't really meet my dad's high standards for lips, so I've been taking more of a crack at it lately when I get a chance. Upon inspection of Mrs. Linderman, my dad only needed to fix a couple areas. I hadn't fully covered up the bruise on her hand near the cuff of her light pink pantsuit. Very fashionable. Speaking of fashionable, I'm still wearing the same cheap black suit I wore on the Malinsky call, and my dad noticed my black shoes and brown belt combo while we were both hunched over Mrs. Linderman's body. "Cool belt, hee-haw. You get dressed in the dark this morning?" he said with a playful snicker. I should have known he would notice. At the moment, I'm sitting beltless in the funeral home's lounge eating spaghetti and meatballs from Michael's out of a styrofoam container with plastic silverware. Like I said, Italian sounded good. I couldn't help myself. I was actually 3 bites in and cutting a meatball in half when I noticed that the color of the sauce mixed with the chunks of mushroom and meat kind of reminded me of Phil's exploded head and blood. It didn't gross me out because my adult brain knows what I'm eating is food and not brains. Plus, this was a $12 order of spaghetti. You better believe I'm going to finish this. I take a bite that's almost too big for my mouth. All I can hear is the wet chewing sounds inside my head. This sound is actually grossing me out much more than anything I saw at Phil's house last night. Weird. This morning's rock stars and biscuits and gravy aren't mixing well with the sauce and the pasta, though. Great. More diarrhea. I'm supposed to be doing busy work this afternoon, but I'll probably just sneak up to the 3rd floor arrangement room and doze off on the hideous yet very comfortable couch hidden away from everyone. I'll just tell Ned and my dad that I'm cleaning the casket room. I don't think anyone will miss me, but I may have to actually clean a couple caskets. Worth it. I crush a meatball with my fork and watch the ground beef break apart and push through the slots between the tines like meaty Play-Doh. I spool some noodles and meat around my fork and shovel it into my mouth. While I chew, I think about the cross in Phil's bedroom juxtaposed to his ruined body and bedspread. I'm not sure where to file this information. It's 12:30. My name is Grant, and these are my funeral home stories. I hope you enjoyed this episode.